There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a founder the moment they realize something has gone wrong. Not the silence of failure. Not the kind that comes after a missed payment or a bad review or a product that didn't sell. This silence is different. It arrives after something goes right, after the number on the screen climbs past anything they'd ever planned for, past anything their spreadsheet had a row for, past the edge of every assumption they'd quietly built their business on. This is the silence of 3,000 orders. And somewhere inside it, beneath the initial rush of disbelief and excitement, is a question that doesn't announce itself cleanly. It settles in slowly, the way cold water rises. Because the orders are real, the customers are real, the revenue is real, but the business, the actual machine built to fulfill all of it, was designed for not 3,000. That gap between what the business promised the world and what it could actually deliver is where the story begins. To understand what happens when growth becomes the problem, you first have to understand what a small business actually is. Beneath the surface, beneath the brand and the product and the story the founder tells about it, a small business at low volume isn't a scaled-down version of a large company. It's an entirely different kind of organism. It runs on proximity. The founder knows every supplier by name. They remember which customers ordered last Tuesday. They pack boxes themselves or with one other person in a space that was probably not designed for packing boxes. Quality control isn't a system. It's a person looking carefully before sealing the tape. Customer service isn't a department. It's a phone that the same person answers between everything else they're doing. None of this is a flaw. At 3 orders a week, this is exactly the right architecture. It's efficient in the truest sense. No excess, no overhead, no process that costs more than the problem it solves. The founder built something that works precisely at the scale it was designed for. But inside that efficiency is something invisible, a set of load-bearing assumptions so deeply embedded in the daily routine that nobody ever named them. The assumption that there's always time to personally check each order. The assumption that the supplier can fulfill whatever is needed within a few days. The assumption that cash received this week will cover what needs to be purchased next week. The assumption that one person can handle everything that needs handling. These assumptions aren't written down anywhere. They don't appear in the business plan. They exist in the rhythm of how Tuesday feels different from Friday, in the mental map the founder carries of where everything is, and what everything costs, and when everything arrives. Growth doesn't create new weaknesses. It finds the ones that were always there, invisible because the volume never demanded anything from them. Until 3,000 orders arrived overnight. What actually breaks first is rarely what the founder expects. The instinct, when orders flood in, is to focus on fulfillment. How do we pack and ship all of this? That urgency is real, but it's also a distraction from the deeper cascade already beginning upstream. Start with the supplier. A business running 3 orders a week has likely settled into a comfortable informal relationship with whoever provides the product or materials. Maybe there's no formal contract. Maybe there's no minimum order requirement because the volume never demanded one. Maybe the supplier holds just enough inventory to serve this account because, historically, this account has never needed more than that. Now, suddenly, the founder calls and needs 30 times what they've ever ordered before, immediately or close to it. The supplier, operating their own system built for their own customers' normal demands, cannot simply produce 30 times the product overnight. There is a queue. There are other clients. There is a physical limit to what their own capacity allows. The product that customers ordered may not yet exist in the building it was supposed to ship from. Meanwhile, the fulfillment side is experiencing its own version of the same problem. Packing 3 orders takes a known amount of time with a known number of hands. Packing 3,000 orders is not the same task multiplied. It's a fundamentally different task. It requires coordination, which requires communication, which requires people who aren't already doing 3 other things simultaneously. The system that worked beautifully at low volume begins to fracture, not because the work is different, but because the volume has exposed every friction point that proximity and familiarity used to absorb without anyone noticing. Customer service becomes its own emergency. Customers who ordered expect the same delivery window that perhaps the website still promises, because nobody had time to update it. Messages arrive, then more messages. Then the same customers message again, because the first message wasn't answered. Each unanswered message is not just a frustrated customer. It is a small compounding erosion of the trust that brought those 3,000 people to order in the first place. And all of this is happening simultaneously. That's the part that doesn't translate in a list. Each individual problem, supplier delay, fulfillment backlog, unanswered messages, would be manageable in isolation. But they arrive together, feeding each other, each one making the others harder to solve. This is what nonlinear scaling actually means. It isn't that 3,000 orders take 1,000 times longer than 3 orders. It's that 3,000 orders arriving into a system built for 3 don't slow the system down. They stop it entirely. But there is something happening beneath the operational chaos that is even more dangerous, and almost nobody talks about it clearly. The business is making more money than it ever has. Revenue is real. The orders represent real payment from real customers. And yet the business, in the middle of its greatest commercial success, may be moving toward insolvency. This is the cash flow trap of rapid growth, and it is one of the most counterintuitive mechanisms in all of business finance. Here is how it works. To fulfill 3,000 orders, the founder needs inventory, far more than they currently have. That inventory must be purchased before it can be shipped, but the revenue from those 3,000 orders may not arrive for days or weeks, depending on the payment processing cycle, the platform the business uses, or the payment terms in place. So the founder is spending cash they don't yet have to fulfill orders that will generate revenue they can't yet access. In the meantime, they may need to hire temporary help, people who need to be paid now, before efficiency improves. They may need faster shipping options to close the gap on delayed fulfillment, which costs more per unit than the pricing model assumed. They may need to pay a supplier premium for expedited production. Every solution to the operational crisis costs money, and every dollar spent on solving the crisis is a dollar that must come from somewhere that isn't the revenue sitting in processing limbo. A business can be, in the truest accounting sense, profitable, and simultaneously unable to pay its bills this week. Analysts who study small business failure during growth periods have observed this pattern repeatedly. The business doesn't fail because it ran out of customers. It fails because it ran out of cash at the exact moment it needed the most of it. This is why undercapitalization during growth is so lethal, not because the business was poorly run, because growth, at speed, consumes cash faster than it generates it, and the margin between those two timelines is where companies disappear. None of this is purely mechanical. Behind every operational cascade, behind every cash flow gap, there is a person making decisions in conditions they have never experienced before. The founder who built this business did so over months or years of careful, iterative adjustment. They learned what worked by watching what didn't, at a pace that allowed learning. They had time to recover from mistakes. They had the proximity to their own operation that made information available before it became a crisis. That is gone now. The surge arrives without a manual. There is no prior experience to draw from, because nothing in the history of this business resembles this moment. Decisions that normally take a day to make carefully now need answers in the next hour. And the consequences of those decisions, which supplier to prioritize, which orders to delay, what to communicate to customers and when, are larger than anything the founder has navigated before, by an order of magnitude. What happens psychologically in this moment follows a recognizable pattern. The first hours carry a strange euphoria. The numbers are extraordinary. The dream is apparently real. Something worked. Then, as the first problems surface, there is a phase of aggressive problem solving. The belief that, with enough effort, this can all be managed. Then comes the moment, usually somewhere in the second or third day of sustained overwhelm, when the founder realizes that effort alone will not close the gap, that the business, as constructed, cannot deliver what it has promised. This is the loneliest moment in the story, because the world outside sees only the success. The metrics are extraordinary. Maybe a post went viral. Maybe a feature appeared somewhere. The messages coming in are excited, celebratory, full of orders and compliments, and the exact language the founder spent years hoping to hear. And the founder is reading those messages at 2 a.m., surrounded by boxes, trying to decide whether to tell customers the truth about delays or buy more time with optimistic language they know is uncertain. There is no framework for this. Business school doesn't cover the psychology of surviving your own breakthrough. The founder is improvising, under pressure, with incomplete information, in a system that is actively failing while they are trying to operate it. The decisions made in these hours will shape whether the business survives, and the quality of those decisions depends not just on operational knowledge, but on the psychological capacity to stay clear under conditions designed to produce panic. Some businesses survive this moment, not all of them, but some. And what separates them from the ones that don't is not, primarily, capital. Although capital helps. It is not luck, although timing matters. What separates them is something that was decided long before the surge arrived. The founders whose businesses absorbed a 3,000 order surge had, at some earlier point, made investments that looked irrational at the time. They had signed supplier agreements with capacity clauses that seemed unnecessary given their current volume. They had built fulfillment processes that felt like overkill for the number of orders coming in. They had opened a line of credit they didn't expect to need. They had documented their own operations in a way that allowed someone else to step in and execute without the founder's constant presence. At 3 orders a week, these investments were hard to justify. They added cost and complexity to a business that didn't appear to need either. An outside observer might have called it inefficiency. A competitor operating leaner might have underpriced them. But when the surge arrived, those investments weren't overhead. They were the only reason the business didn't collapse. The businesses that survived had built for demand that didn't exist yet. They had absorbed the cost of preparation before they knew whether preparation would be necessary. And the ones that hadn't, the ones that stayed lean right up until the moment the world discovered them, found themselves trying to build infrastructure at full speed, under full load, with no margin for error and no time to learn. Infrastructure, it turns out, is not what you build after growth arrives. It's what you build so that growth has somewhere to land. There is a deeper truth underneath all of this that changes how growth should be understood, not just by founders, but by anyone who thinks about business, markets, and what it actually means to succeed. We tend to treat growth as the validation of everything that came before it. If the business grows, the product was good, the instincts were right, the sacrifices were worth it. And in one sense, that's true. Demand is real signal. If 3,000 people ordered overnight, something genuine was built. But growth is not only a reward, it is a test. And it tests something entirely different from what got the business to that moment. Getting from 0 to 3 orders a week requires a great product, genuine value, the right positioning, and the kind of stubborn persistence that most people underestimate. Those are real skills. They are genuinely difficult. They deserve exactly the credit they usually receive. Getting from 3 orders to 3,000 and surviving it requires something else entirely. It requires the infrastructure behind the product, the supplier relationships, the fulfillment systems, the financial cushion, the team capacity, the documentation, the decision-making frameworks. These are not the same skills. They are not even the same domain of thinking. And most founders, having spent everything they had, time, money, energy, attention, on building something good enough to attract demand, arrive at the moment of growth with the first set of skills fully developed and the second set barely started. This is not a failure of intelligence or effort. It is a structural reality of how small businesses develop. The product must come first, because without demand, the infrastructure has nothing to serve. But the infrastructure must be ready before demand arrives, because once it arrives, there is no longer time to build it. This is the impossible geometry of growth, and it means that the businesses most likely to survive a breakthrough are the ones that spent time and resources preparing for a success they couldn't yet prove was coming. The most dangerous moment in a business is not when it's failing. Failure, strange as it sounds, is navigable. It arrives with signals. Revenue declines. Customers stop returning. Margins compress. These are visible indicators that something needs to change, and they usually leave time to respond. Failure is painful, but it is legible. A sudden growth surge is different. It arrives without warning, disguised as victory, and it demands that the entire business perform at a level it has never been tested at, immediately, simultaneously, with no rehearsal and no margin for learning by doing. The businesses that understand this don't wait for the surge to prepare. They build the systems quietly, before anyone is watching, at a scale that looks like excess right up until the moment it becomes survival. And perhaps that is the real lesson beneath the title. Not that growth is dangerous. It isn't, inherently. Not that founders should fear success. They shouldn't. But that building something capable of succeeding requires a different kind of ambition than building something good enough to be discovered. It requires the discipline to invest in what the business will need at a scale it hasn't reached yet, without the certainty that it ever will. The founders who do this don't look smart in the early days. They look overcautious. They look like they're spending too much, building too much, preparing for something no one can guarantee is coming, until 3,000 orders arrive overnight. And then they look like the only people in the room who understood what success actually requires.